When our heart is in a holy place, we are blessed with love and amazing grace, we just sang. With these words, I want you to consider the simple question: what is a holy place? Or better, what makes some place a holy place? The hymn invites us to think about the word place metaphorically. But these last months of the pandemic, as I stood in this pulpit and offered what word I could to a congregation that was absent in body but present in spirit, I found myself repeatedly contemplating not the metaphorical holy place, but the physical one. Some weeks, I must admit, that our sanctuary did not feel particularly holy. In order to produce our worship services, we had to turn it into a studio. The pulpit was flanked by light diffusers, large white rectangles that covered bulbs and softened the way we appeared on your screens. Decorative props found their homes in the pews. But rather than addressing a gathered community, I read from a teleprompter. Week by week, there was no one other than the staff to bless their building and this space with their presence, though bless it, they did. At such times when my world was circumscribed to this pulpit, my office, my apartment, and the occasional foray to the grocery store, I found myself casting back to the holy places that I've known. I invite you to come with me and recall a few of these places together so that we might find something of an answer to the question, what is a holy place? The Sufi poet Rumi offers us guidance here on our imagined journey. We opened our service with his invitation to join upon a caravan. Ven, ven, qual eres ven. Come, come, whoever you are. Let's continue with his invitation to a holy place found in a beloved poem. Out beyond ideas of wrongdoing and right doing, there is a field. I'll meet you there. When the soul lies down in the grass, the world is too full even to talk about. Ideas, language, even the phrase each other doesn't make any sense. Ideas, language, even the phrase each other. Let me suggest as we embark to holy places, that one of the challenges of our sojourn is that the holy, whatever it is ultimately something that cannot be rendered into words. The question that we seek to answer, what is a holy place, is not one we can completely approach through constructs like sentences and paragraphs. It is in the end about felt experience. This place feels holy. That place does not. Beyond ideas. And yet I still invite you to come with me and visit 3 locations I longed for during these last difficult months. I dreamed of them as I struggled to find connection and wondered when again it might feel like my heart was in a holy place. Have you ever been to an abandoned church or temple? It feels entirely differently than the church of a living congregation. The first holy place I invite you to visit has been long vacated by the people who once worshiped there. We begin our travels to a church in the provincial town of Arles, France. It sits at the end of Les Halles-Champs, known in English as the Avenue of the Monuments. Les Halles-Champs is an extensive Roman necropolis past the old city's edge. Even if you've never traveled to Arles, you might know of the place I speak. Vincent van Gogh loved to paint it, making 4 separate paintings of the avenue. Paul Gauguin painted it twice. Each artist's depictions feature the millennial-old stone sarcophagi that line the path to the church. Looted of their contents and almost any information about their long-dead inhabitants, they remind me of an anonymous inscription found on a similar site. I grew from the earth. I flourished in my day. I am earth again. Walking along this avenue of the dead, under trees rendered in flame orange, smudged yellow, haunted white by Van Gogh, we arrive at the church itself. I do not know when it was last sanctified. Certainly not this century, probably not in the last. Maybe not even in the one before that. It stands at the end of a burial ground where all have long since turned to dust. Moldering itself, there is no furniture within it. Here the wall has fallen in. There a gap in the roof. Along that side where sunlight once broke against stained glass, a hand-hewn window frame is a passage for pigeons. There's been no sermon, no word, no rite of passage, funeral, or wedding offered inside the building for generations. Does such a description seem familiar? We need not travel far to find ruined religious sites. Over in Fourth Ward, we can even visit the former building of the Bethel Church. Destroyed by arson, as so many of the ward's churches have been, its shell remains a testament to the holy space that the community that once gathered there created. Despite their desolation, such sites bespeak holiness to me. When I enter them, I get caught in contemplation. I imagine all that took place within their crumbling walls, the communion that was, which blessed births, deaths, unions, all that is our lives. Such holy places were established as places for ritual. Rituals are those things that we undertake together to change or to acknowledge changes in our relationships. In a religious community, we dedicate children. To recognize that a new being, a new possibility for relationship is among us. We celebrate weddings to honor the beginnings of families. We gather for memorial services to accept that death has occurred and that someone has transitioned to be with their ancestors. Ritual. Let me suggest that the first answer to our question, what makes a place a holy place, is caught up in ritual. A holy place is a place for ritual. It is a place where we go, or a place where people once went, to conduct the rituals that change us and change our relationships. In such places, who we are becomes fundamentally altered. Ritual also connects us to something greater than ourselves. And here, maybe just here, I might suggest that you could offer up a brief amen, not because I deserve it, but because taking a moment for collective engagement in the service is something that knits us together as a congregation. There we go. Okay. For it is our ritual, like our amens, that affirms that we are in relationship with each other and in relationship to this common place. And that relationship remains as a testament in places like that ruined church and the Avenue of the Dead, even after the people who have long since died have left there, because it is a monument to the relationships that they had to each other and all of the lives that they passed together. And so relationship is the second thing we turn to when we think about what makes a place a holy place. Holy places are places for communities like this one to gather for the holy act of friendship, which is the sharing of the self with the other. It is a place where those friendships unfold, and we honor each other when we see the face of the divine in one another and the spark of the divine that lies within. Not all of our relationships or even our friendships have to be with other human beings. Here, let me offer you a brief aside about my relationship with my cat. The writer Ursula Le Guin once claimed, "The cat is the soul of the house." And I aspire to make my house a holy place, so I aspire to have a cat. But in our considerations of holy places, I do want us to push beyond the boundaries of relationship, beyond even those we might have with our animal friends. Let us visit a grove of trees I know. It lives in Cleveland, Ohio, where I served as a minister more than a few years ago. These are ancient white oaks. I do not know how long they've stood. 150 years? 200 years? Each is tall. taller than the eye can follow when you look up into the foliage, taller than I can imagine climbing. The canopy is so far out of reach, but we can wander among the meandering root structures, erupting through, knitting together the soil, the good earth. Their bark is wrinkled and worried like the wisdoms that the trees offer. Visit them in July, and you will find an abundance of their good friends, yellow chanterelles blooming among them. What damp, what heat, what time in summer is to be found lingering among those trunks? I used to visit them often. They live in a park not far from the house where I lived. Almost weekly, as July bled into August, I would wander there for mushrooms. But at other times as well. In autumn, to watch the leaves burn flame red. In winter, to find them transformed by snow's beauty. In spring, to watch as green buds unfurled. In that holy place, I felt myself connected to the land on which I lived. I was in relationship with the trees. I do not know if they knew me or were aware of me, brief living creature that I am, passing by as I did. But in those visits, they helped to teach me to see my relationship with the land on the very ground on which I stood differently. I did not see it through the view of what indigenous people like the Potawatomi scholar Robin Wall-Killer has named the settler mind, the perspective that sees land as not something we are in relationship with, but property, real estate, capital, or natural resources. Instead, I experienced it as sacred ground, a gift. Do you know a similar place where you visit and connect to your relationship with what Kimmer has named the meaning of the land, the deep truth that we are creatures of this earth, born from it, flourish on it, and return to it? Can you recall that place now? How does it feel to be there? A holy place opens us up to the truth that we are creatures of this planet and dependent on it for our very existence. This is one of the most urgent truths of the hour. This past week, as Europe flooded and the Northwest burned, there was once again news of the urgency of the climate crisis. The New York Times ran a piece titled, "No One is Safe. Extreme weather batters the wealthy world." Writing of the twin horrors of flooding and burning, the paper quoted the former president of the Maldives, Mohammed Nasheed, whose country is existentially threatened by the ocean's rising and warming waters. He observed, in the climate emergency, no one is safe. No one is safe because one of the holy truths that holy places like that grove in Cleveland can connect us to is that we are all bound up together. Not just you and me, not just the human community, but the trees, the plants, the mushrooms, the animals, all life, all connected, all in relationship with each other. This week, I found myself considering this urgent truth as I listened to the news of billionaires blasting off into space. I wondered, are they trying to escape this holy place? Are they attempting to forsake their relationship with this muddy blue ball of a planet? Certainly, the money spent on vanity spaceflight could be better spent on addressing the climate crisis or alleviating poverty. The wealth of the richest has the power to make a difference here, on this place, in this holy place we call Earth. Listening to the wealthiest among us speak of space, I was not alone in remembering Gil Scott-Heron's words from a generation ago. Was all the money I made last year for Whitey on the moon? How come there ain't no money here? Whitey on the moon. With no slight against the scientific exploration of space, obviously a dangerous subject here in Space City, let us land back on Earth and consider our holy places here. The third aspect of holy places, the third invitation to visit with me, offers one I dreamed of as I spent months in what seemed like an increasingly claustrophobic apartment. The dream did not come from my past, it was what I hoped for in my future, a new place called home. The poet Philip Levine writes for the hope for holiness of home in his beautiful piece, Burned. Before long, we found a room and entered the darkness together, holding each other as long as we could in hope we would be home. As Levine implies, home is where we share the stories that are our lives. It is a place where we live our narratives together. Alongside ritual and relationship, our stories are what make a place holy. And so this spring, as my partner and I blended our families, I found myself seeking a better place for us to live and for us to make holy together. In doing so, we switched neighborhoods. I left, and actually I should admit, I am leaving since we are in the midst of the incredibly difficult work of moving. I left Montrose for Midtown, or is it the Third Ward? The different names for our new neighborhoods signal the stories that people want to tell about them, the ways in which we might conceive of them as holy places or not. Midtown, a realtor's designation to suggest that the area is urban and urbane, replete with hipster bars and fancy coffee shops and offering an easy commute for the weary knowledge worker. The Third Ward, a historic heart of Houston's Black community, home to Emancipation Park, to the Shape Center, to cultural icons like the Knowles sisters, to institutions devoted to freedom and political power and culture too numerous to name. One of the most fraught questions about a holy place, or indeed any place, is whose stories are told there. The land we call Houston is Kiwakana land by unceded ancestral right. So much of the conflict in the world is over which story about the land, which story about this holy place we all live in is the story that shall be told there. This is true in the question between Midtown and the Third Ward. It is true in incidents and ongoing conflicts like the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. The dispute is ultimately about which stories will dominate that particular land. The stories of the nation-state of Israel or the stories of the Palestinian peoples. The stories of place are meant to tell us whose lives are important and whose lives are not held to be important. We live, as we do, in a country where the stories of indigenous peoples are held so often in official narratives to be less important than the Europeans who arrived to this continent. The stories of the indigenous nations are forgotten in the stories of the nation's founding. Stories. The stories we tell are perhaps the most charged aspect of what makes a place a holy place. But they, along with ritual and relationship, make a place holy. The sacred is not necessarily an undisputed good. Facing it honestly means facing our relationships honestly. And that is difficult work. Work that uncovers not just the beautiful, the interlacing branches of those oaks, but the things we do to each other and the land. Story, relationship, ritual. Let me suggest that to be truly in a holy place, a fourth element is needed. I invite you to hear the words of the Hebrew prophet Isaiah. The Lord will bring this charge against the elders and officers of his people. It is you who have ravaged the vineyard. That which was robbed from the poor is in your homes. How dare you crush my people and grind the faces of the poor? And hear the words of the Hebrew prophet Jeremiah. He upheld the rights of the poor and needy. Then all was well. That is truly heeding me, declares the Lord. Such words point to a truth hidden sometimes but referred to often in this sermon. A place is made holy by its pursuit of justice. Throughout the United States, but particularly here in Texas, the need to make our place, this country, holy by the presence of justice is sorely needed. The legislature works right now to restrict voting. If voting is a sacred act, the secular sacrament of a representative democracy, then the laws that are being pushed by the party in power here in Texas are meant to exclude many from the holy place where elections take place. For Unitarian Universalists, the idea that the polling place can be a holy place is attested to of our long struggling against white supremacy and for voting rights for all. 3 separate ministers from Houston marched in Selma, Alabama for voting rights. The Reverend Clark Dewey Wells was with the martyred civil rights activist and Unitarian Universalist, the Reverend James Reeb, when Reeb died, beaten to death by Klansmen for trying to make the sacrament of voting available for all. Rituals are empty and meaningless if they are not accompanied by right intent. The ritual of democracy history has shown, is meaningless if it's not accompanied by right intention. Now here I do not mean how you vote. I mean whether voting is available to all. Democracy is only sacred if the people have a say. If not all have their voices heard, it is something else, something unholy. When our heart is in a holy place, justice, story, relationship, ritual. Let me close where I started by speaking of this place, the First Unitarian Universalist Church of Houston. I spoke at the beginning of how I wondered during your long months of absence whether or not this was still a holy place. Whether it was or not then, it definitely is now. When the congregation gathers, our collective rituals, relationships, stories, and pursuit of justice make this building a holy place for me. And as your minister, I want it for you to be a holy place for you as well. For our longtime members, I know that it is. For our visitors, I hope it will be. And so, gathered congregation, present in body and in the spirit, or joining us in spirit from home, I want to invite you to help me conclude this sermon with a prayer. Spirit of life, that some of us name as God and others know as our human capacity to tell our stories that make a place sacred. Be with us today as we continue in our process of regathering, so that we continue to make this building and all that it represents a holy place. A place for ritual, a place for relationship, a place for story, a place for justice, a place for all that is our lives. That it might be so, I invite the congregation to say, Amen.